Welcome to a very important session, and we have three very knowledgeable people in the area of AI and academic integrity, and I'll introduce them in a moment. My name is Somogyi. I'm a Commissioner of TEQSA, and it's great to see so many of you both here at the conference today and keenly interested in the topics in this session. We have quite a number of people online as well, and I'm sure that they'll be able to put their questions in online, but you are welcome to put your questions in online as well, or put your hands up if you have a question, and there will be a mic roving around the room to capture your questions or your thoughts. We've got 45 minutes, well now less than that because I've spoken for 2 or 3 minutes already, and we want to make sure we get the best out of this session, and please don't hesitate to think about what it is that you'd like to know more about. So let me introduce the three speakers. Professor Marianne Williams, who's the Michael J. Crouch Chair for Innovation at the University of New South Wales. This is an institute that was set up through the generosity of Michael Crouch, who was an entrepreneur and an innovator himself, and a great business leader. And he started many things during his career, but in particular was a very generous benefactor. The area that Marianne is interested in, and she was at equally for a number of years an innovator and provider of thought-leading research at UTS before she joined the University of New South Wales, is in the area of how AI can be best used to the betterment of both the sector, to students, and how you can protect in this area. There's lots of innovation going on, and she's been a practitioner in digital technology for a number of years. And I'll invite Marianne in a moment to speak for a couple of minutes, and then hand on to Professor Philip Dawson. Phill is the Associate Director of the, sorry I have to read this out, Centre for Research in Assessment and Digital Learning. So if I say CRADLE, you'll put all those words behind each of those letters. But Phill has degrees in education, artificial intelligence, cyber security, just a minor topic or set of topics to think about, and he leads the CRADLE's work on cheating, academic integrity and assessment security. Lots of interesting things may come out of that work, and today as well. And the last speaker will be Associate Professor Sarah Howard, who's practicing in the area of digital technologies in education at the University of Wollongong, and is a visiting professor of a famous university in Brussels as well. And one of the things I should have asked was how to pronounce the university's name.
You can say Free University.
Free.
It means free. It's free.
Excellent. It's spelled V-R-I-J-E, so correct. Hence my hesitation in trying to pronounce it. So that sounds like a Flemish name.
It's Dutch.
Dutch? Yeah, well, Flemish. Okay, so we have three very expert speakers. They will challenge your minds, and I'd like you to challenge theirs. So after they've finished their short presentations, I expect to be flooded with questions and expect to have lots of hands up. And you will be marked at the end of this session by the number of questions you ask. So, Marianne, you're first on the agenda.
So,
Is your mic on?
I don't know.
Can you hear? Okay.
So I'm sure you're in this room because you're beginning to realise that AI is changing everything. And generative AI is just changing the way we think about knowledge and creativity. And human creativity is kind of important to us, right? It's like the last bastion that we have against technology. I think of generative AI like a next generation search engine. So, you know, Google's first generation, you put in a few keywords, you get back documents and web pages. For generative AI, you put in questions and it comes back with summaries of answers. So, you know, students today, I mean, they don't have time to read all the links that come back from a Google search, and they have very little influence over which ones come back and how they're ranked. And, you know, it's an impossible, you know, so students themselves need tools to help find the interesting sorts of, well, knowledge or insights that they're trying to find. It's an information retrieval task, okay? And the current methods are broken. And generative AI is a tool that can help them. And the sort of the tools have actually encapsulated the entire web, right? They've, you know, literally billions, more than 100 billion data points. And if you play with these technologies, you will begin to understand what it can do and what is sort of cheap to do today, and what humans cannot possibly compete against. And I'm going to argue that the skill in the generative AI today, and probably for the foreseeable future, is paraphrasing. And we, as educators and in our assessments, focus way too much on paraphrasing, and we think, oh, if a student can paraphrase something rather than just copy it, they must understand it. And I think generative AI just blows that out of the water. That just cannot be true. Because AI is, you know, just finding correlations, just finding patterns. And that's very different to, you know, understanding in the way that humans would sort of appreciate it. And I think, you know, the feature of generative AI to be able to kind of summarize millions, billions of, you know, documents and web pages means that we could exploit it by creating, you know, new ways for students to engage with that information. We can be building, you know, safe, because we know a lot of the data out there is maybe not so safe, especially for, you know, younger students or whatever. But we need a safe, interactive, real-time environment where students can play, they can experiment, they can critique, and they can learn. And so I feel like generative AI opens up a whole new world to how we can help our students learn, and learn about language, learn about communication, persuasion, and all those sort of social intelligence kinds of skills. And just like calculators totally transformed all of the disciplines that, you know, require quantitative types of analysis, generative AI is going to totally transform all those disciplines that require qualitative analysis. So that's my position.
Thank you, Marianne. Phill, you're next.
Thanks. I'm going to assume everyone can hear me unless they make a big racket about it, which they couldn't do if they didn't hear me say that. But sorry, you realise these things as you go. So I'm going to build off Marianne's point and, you know, go back really, really far. We go back to Socrates, and there's Socrates there, and it's not Socrates writing about this because he didn't do that, but it's Socrates there, and he's saying it's all these people who write stuff down, and they appear as if they know something, but really they just wrote it down, or really they just read it. And this is a terrible thing for our ability to know what people are capable of. And I feel like we're just having that same moment over and over and over again as different technologies come through. It was the Year 8 maths teacher that I had telling me you're not going to have the calculator in your pocket with you everywhere you go, which we saw how that went. So I've got it. It is in some senses that moment. And I'm an assessment researcher, and at the risk of being that person with the hammer that sees everything as the nail, to me this is an assessment problem. And it's a big one, because right now we have an assessment problem that some people call the problem of the passable essay. You know, you look at what gets a passing grade as an essay, and we're not saying the good pass, we're saying the P that makes the degree. So you look at the standard there, and AI can produce that. I don't think AI can produce your HD very well. Some people have done various experiments, and sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but it can somewhat reliably produce okay work, good enough work. Work you won't be proud of, but it'll satisfy the requirements to pass the thing. And to me, that's a problem that can spark a whole bunch of really wonderful changes for us. So it can lead us to have some reflection around standards, around, is this really the thing that we're after people to be able to do? Is this what we would say is good enough to get a qualification that allows you to go out into the world and do certain things and be seen in a certain way? Is this enough? But it also makes us reflect on, well, what if we taught people how to use these tools really, really well? What if we equip them so they can go out into the world and do more than they would be able to with just their own human brain? So it's an exciting opportunity there. The way that we handle it as an assessment problem, sometimes we might have to say, no, actually right now is the time where we need to see you do these things without the supports and the assistance. But hopefully that's not all the time. Hopefully that's just sometimes. If we think we're, say, training a pilot to fly an aeroplane, we don't say to them, now because the instruments might fail sometimes, we need to never see you use the instruments. We need to see you fly the plane all the time. No, we want them to use the instruments. We want them to use the navigation and whatever the autopilot really is. I've heard conspiracies it does more than pilots claim it does. But we want to be able to train our students to be able to use these tools to do amazing things and to equip them to go out into the world with an understanding of that. What does that then leave for people to do? There's a great chapter by Margaret Bierman and Rose Luckin in the book Reimagining University Assessment in a Digital World, where they claim what stays uniquely human is some capabilities around what we call evaluative judgment, your ability to make decisions about the quality of work, that will be a uniquely human thing. I think there's probably other uniquely human things we want to keep as well. But yeah, so I see this as a scary problem in the short term that we should probably all be moving faster on than we are now, but wonderful opportunities in the longer term, probably with some scary things as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Phill. Good to see you going back to the cradle of humanity, the Greeks.
Thank you.
I've been waiting to say that, huh?
Well, I had to use the word cradle somehow. Thank you.
That was good. It was so smooth.
Your turn, Sarah.
Great, thanks. And thanks both for a great opening. I am also going to extend from what Phill has said. So I look at teacher practice, and I look at teacher practice with digital technologies. So my interest in AI is as, not so much as an assessment issue, but as another digital technology issue. This is our new digital technology. We've been through this before. What is it? What does it do? How do we use it in our teaching to support our own practice? But also, how do we bring our students to the technology so they can get the most out of it? So what Phill is saying in terms of how do we actually use when we say AI, we'll use it as like the broadest general kind of bucket. I'd like to speak in buckets. But how do we bring these technologies to students in ways so that they can learn how to use them to their best ability, to be able to take advantage of the idea that, You can extract knowledge and information that you can then build on, that you can critically engage with it, that you can problem solve, that you can have more information summarized in a better way so you can access a greater amount of information so you can make better decisions. And that's what we need to be thinking about in terms of, one, how we design AI that comes into education for educators and students to use, but then also how we understand that as part of our own practice. And this is kind of touching on a broad set of kind of capabilities that we've been thinking about in terms of what are the capabilities of our teachers in higher ed as well as schools, so across the spectrum. It's a question for everyone. Because when we talk about students using or doing or creating, who teaches them how to do that? Right? So we know students who aren't asked to work at a higher level with digital technologies are not going to. We know we have to teach them how to use these tools. And if a teacher at higher ed or whatever level isn't able to get their head around that technology themselves, it's not going to come into the learning space. And therefore, the good practices, the sophisticated uses, the ways that students are going to use these tools to really further and better their own practice in uni, to be able to competently and beyond competently complete these assessments isn't going to happen. They have to be demonstrated how to do this, and it has to be modeled to them. And this is a really significant problem in terms of how, as institutions, we bring these technologies in to the teaching space. And again, this isn't necessarily an AI problem. This has been our problem with digital technologies for decades. We're still struggling with this. And in fact, we already know the answers of how to do it, so I won't bore everyone with the details on that. But we need educators to be able to integrate these tools into their practice, then extend it out to students. Some students will do it naturally, of course, but we want to bring them more up to this level. And also bring more up to the level where they can competently work, so they're not simply taking advantage of the lowest common denominator, P's for degrees, which isn't where we need our population to be. We need our students to be doing more things. We're not a big group, so we really need everyone to be performing at the best level so they really are able to do the best work they can when they leave the university. And that's what we're really looking for. But there's some really concrete things we need to do around preparing our educators to be able to use these tools. Unfortunately, it's a bit of an unknown space right now, but, you know, we're getting there. And here we are.
So thank you very much for our three speakers starting the ball rolling. Now remember, if you want to get out the door, you have to put your hand up and ask the question. And so far, I've seen no questions being asked. So let me... there we are. You've saved me. Just a sec. It's coming. It's coming.
Whoa.
Well caught.
Dangerous.
I repeat that.
Yep.
Josiah Hilbig, I'm from Eastern College, Australia. And I'm quite interested in the side of AI that helps to combat academic cheating. And I see that there are two facets to this. The first one is, of course, falsifying essays, for example, in undergraduate and postgraduate coursework. And we can see that AI is helping to combat that already with tools such as Turnitin, where word analysis and sentence analysis can be used to help detect plagiarized work. The other facet, of course, is falsified research data in high-level master's and PhD work. And I'm curious to know, because that seems to me, at least, to be much harder to detect using AI. Is there any work being developed in that side of academic cheating? Is that possible? Is that a great difficulty? I'm curious to know what you think.
Who's going to take that one?
That's a Phill question.
Yeah, so I might jump on this one. So around the sort of student work, yes, there are loads of AI technologies that are being developed, that are being used, that are being loved, are being hated, are having articles written in the media claiming various things and claims made by the people that sell them that don't quite add up. It's quite a contentious space. I think there's room for some more sort of AI ethics type work to be done there around some of those. There's also room for some real good efficacy work to be done around some of those. My rant that I go on, which I'll give you the condensed version, is I've been asking remote proctoring vendors to let me do a study where I try to cheat in their remote proctoring products, and none of them have said yes to me. Now, make of that what you will. I do think there's a lot of good studies out there showing that remote proctoring is probably a good deterrent against cheating, in that people score poorer when they are remote proctored versus when they're not, although there could be other explanations. But there's not good studies showing that the sort of AI stuff they've got behind the scenes is good at addressing cheating. So that's on your academic integrity side of things, on your sort of research integrity side of things. I don't even know if this is something we need hardcore AI on. So there are some people out there that make it their sort of life's mission to go out and do the work of identifying that sort of research misconduct, falsified data sets. If you follow Microbiome Digest on Twitter, that account goes in and just looks at papers and says, this graph actually couldn't work, it couldn't happen. So there are people doing that. Yeah, probably also ripe for AI work as well, but there's stuff we could be doing by hand there that we're just not.
Does anyone want to add anything to that? Marianne, you might want to talk about assessments.
Just a small thought, and that is, what do you mean by cheating? I mean, by itself, generative AI is, producing summaries. Now, if you don't attribute it to the AI and claim it as your own, yes. But there's nothing sort of intrinsically wrong around, using a generative AI. And I think it challenges the way we think about what it means to cheat. And it's also very different across the disciplines. Consider programming in computer science. That's all about copying and pasting. And what the skill is, knowing what to copy and where to paste. So, that's the culture of programming. And I feel like in innovation, copying is the norm. Even in art, what did Picasso say? Good artists copy, great artists steal. Steve Jobs took that on. He was promoting that. He stole all the great ideas from Xerox PARC. That created Apple. So the ability to copy is actually the most important skill that we should be teaching our students. Okay?
Pity Xerox had to sell out the
Knowing
Fuji.
when and where.
Can I?
Yeah,
I have
Sarah?
something quick to say about that. I don't disagree that knowing how to copy well is, in fact, and every researcher will know. How else do we write a background? But the question on that, and to the point of looking at how students are cheating, I agree with Phill that in the research space, the idea of falsified data or falsified research is something that we've always struggled with, and something that, again, I don't think we do enough, and we find these kind of almost accidentally. But in terms of our students and their assessments, I think there's also a really important, again, not an AI question, but a design question of how we're designing assessments. What are we asking students to do? So to go back to Phil's original point of kind of P's get degrees, if you design an assessment that actually requires students to go beyond the copying, to think about, yes, I know they're going to, and this comes with an understanding of how students are going to be assembling information, how they're bringing that knowledge into the work you're asking them to do. What are you asking them to do with it? I would argue, and people in the room may feel differently, in the higher ed space, we should be beyond summarizing. Like, this is not what we're asking our students to do. So that's fine. They summarize what they have. There are tools to do that. They should be extending that in every assessment that we give them. That is higher education. This is not school. Even in school, they should be extending beyond that. So we're looking at the design. And when we get past that, so again, an understanding of what AI is good at and what it can do well and what we do well as humans, which is problem solve, make complex decisions, understand complicated variables, look at outliers, look at instances to create, to move beyond, to move out of the data set to something new. Maybe not necessarily to innovation, but to be on that edge is what we're asking our students to do, to think in their own way. And that should be evident in a well-designed assessment. And that's, if we are not asking our students to do that, the question isn't AI. The question is, what are you doing in your courses? And I think that's, again, we don't need AI to work that out. That's a staff meeting, sadly.
Sarah, as a non-academic, and I qualify my question on that basis, What are we doing to enable our academics to be more digitally competent in order to do what you've just said?
Asking me to cry.
I'm sorry, I've only got one tissue here.
No, I think academics often see themselves as a gatekeeper rather than the enabler. And everything you just described is what is meant by stealing and why that's different to just copying.
It's extending.
Yes,
Extending.
and that, yes. So that's what great artists do.
That's what great writers do.
Yeah.
That's what anyone does.
Well, a writer is an artist, no? Anyway.
I think Picasso's
So,
It can be.
what was I going to say?
It's okay.
Yes, it's all right. So, yeah.
I'll go to the next question.
Go to the next question.
When I come back to you, you can tell us what you wanted. Yep. So this is the second person who's bought their way out of the door.
Oh, lovely. Hi, I'm Sharon Hebden from the University of Melbourne. I love this discussion around design, so I'm going to take it back even a step further and ask about our learning outcomes then. So with all of the things that you've been talking about, do we need to consider how we actually construct our learning outcomes, not only for our subjects, but also our graduate outcomes for our courses, so that we're actually building these things in and have them as expectations of what we produce at each stage? And is any work happening in that space? Assessment is important, but it hangs off those learning outcomes. How do we build this understanding of AI? How do we build that into our actual structure of our subjects and courses?
Phill, do you want to have a go first?
Yeah. So I guess the first thing is learning outcomes that we can actually assess. And I know you were like, assessment, blah, blah, learning outcomes. But we do have a lot of outcomes that we can't necessarily assess. We also need to look at how low level some of the outcomes are. And I really concur with what's been set up here, that if you give me a really low level learning outcome, I can give you many more ways that I could cheat on that than a higher level one. There's just so many more things I could do. I'd love to sit down with you and write a list. I'm a bit obsessed.
So we have a question about 2/3 of the way down.
So I have a follow-up on that.
Please,
though.
while the microphone's travelling. Go.
In terms of how we are in the construction of expected learning, the kinds of skills that we would like our graduates to be able to demonstrate when they go out into the world, I could say, and I would love someone to prove me wrong, I don't think that, I know that we did a huge push about 8 years ago and sort of really pumping up the analytic quality of expected outcomes. I know we had to do it in the accreditation of all of our courses, so there was that. However, in the higher ed space, we're not coming to terms with our relationship with the digital tools available to us. I could say that pretty confidently. And I talk about it in terms of our relationship with it because I think we are struggling to accept the fact that we are in a kind of, I would hope, symbiotic relationship with the tools that are available to us. And I think the work that we do there's a lot of, to be redundant, work pointing to this. How we work is really changing, and it is embedded with these tools. And to be able to navigate them, to negotiate them, to be able to use the knowledge we extract from them does eliminate a lot of these lower expectations that we have of our students in terms of kind of the basic foundational things we want them to be able to do. I very much would like to see us really engage with the work we can do with the technology at a higher level. We do actually see this in some of the state school curriculum where they actually expressly identify working with multimedia, working with digital technologies. That's in there. But in higher ed, we're not seeing that. And again, when we talk about graduate attributes, I'm talking very, very broadly. And I think that's something that, again, to trickle down into the courses as, the hierarchical organization, that's necessary to make an imperative to be dealt with all the way down to the course and subject level until it shows up at the top. And I'm with Phill on this. assessment's driving it. I mean, it is what drives education, is how are we being assessed and what's being assessed. And if we said graduate attributes are technologically integrated, we're going to see that lower down. I mean, that's going to cascade through. So until we have a big organizational vision that says, you know, we are dealing with this relationship with technology, it's going to just hang out in the fringes. And that's why when you ask how are we preparing our educators to be able to deal with it, well, we're not. We're not directly dealing with it in terms of organizational vision, and that's unfortunate, but we've never dealt with it. So, I mean, is this a more important space? Probably, because, you know, how we're working and things we're working, what we expect of our students is changing. And that's exciting. I think it's super exciting. But we're not really coming to terms with it.
It's a challenge for the sector, though, to
It's a challenge
enable
for,
our
like,
people
everyone.
to be more educated about what they need to be worried
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
I've got two more questions that have just emerged. Another one, a third one. Okay.
Thanks.
Fourth one.
My name's Kay Murdoch, I'm from Macquarie. If we're thinking about the artefacts of assessment, and so machines can replicate those human-shaped artefacts, is assessment more about working out what is the human and allowance? Like you use the word, I think, if I've understood it right, affordances in your book, Phill. You know, and so when we can identify those affordances, so that where a student is allowed to use an AI, and it's about identifying what those things are that identify them as a human, and we can test those things rather than what the machine can do, if that makes sense. Like, take a very different look, not the outputs, but rather, you know, the kind of substructure of assessment.
Yeah. So what can the human do, the machine can't do? What are those affordances? A real dodgy job at defining affordances would be like the things the technology lets me do.
Yep.
The first time I used the word affordances, I got accused of having made up a word, but it's
real.
not my word. It's a real word, and I'll stand by that. Yeah. So, and I think our job, probably in the next few years, in a really big way, is going to be having these serious discipline-based conversations about what does professional practice look like, and how is AI integrated inside that, and what's the stuff people still do? Because, gee, we'd better prepare people to do that, and how they can use those affordances. It's going to be really looking at the work and trying to map that back to what are the artefacts that can represent that. And it might not be things you can hold or see or save as a file. It might be conversations.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And this is what I'm talking about in terms of competencies in the designing, who is designing these assessments, that understands, this could be done by a machine, and it's good at that. So I need to say, this can be done by a machine, and then what do we do with it? Where do we take it? And how do I bring my students to be able to do that? How do I look for it? So you might say, and there are things you can build into assessments depending on how deliberately or explicitly you're looking for these things. But to understand that, I won't say harden, but that fuzzy space where the human and machine kind of come together, and I'll say machine kind of broadly, and what it can do, what are the affordances of that tool, and then where we, again, to use a term I use a lot, extend from that with our own brains, where the human comes into it, and what we're good at. And we are good at some things. We're not obsolete yet. And I think that is, a lot of it is, in terms of that kind of competency, it's just people having a greater understanding of where AI is and what it does and where it exists in our world. So in that, we've done a number of data captures recently on asking people what is AI, and actually educators, what is AI? And there's just like the answers are fascinating, the range of things that people think it is. And most don't actually realize how limited it is, but even in that limitation is quite powerful. So there's a lot of really low-level stuff in terms of educating people to be able to make those decisions and just be aware of, it can write whole essays, and you can't tell the difference. A lot of people don't know that that's entirely possible, or even I get in with my master's students, bless them, whole essays that are written in a different language and then translated, which is fascinating. And you can only, you can see it actually, because it's not, some of the language packs aren't amazing. But even that is really possible, that is really, and it's quite easy until I get things like the soil flow of I'm like, this is about teaching. So you get little tricks in it and what to look for. So even those kinds of simple things in terms of what can happen, and it is a design question, and understanding the limitations of the elements you're bringing into a design.
Thank you, Sarah. Marianne, you want to say anything?
No, I can only agree.
Okay.
I have one little joke to add on.
joke.
It's brief. This one comes from Kath Ellis, and we had someone from the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet here earlier in the day, and I once heard Kath tell this tale of someone who did the translation thing, and they got chief priest and cupboard.
He actually runs the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. Don't let that get in the way of it.
It's excellent.
Next one.
We've talked about that line between the computer and the human. One of the issues that seems to me that we haven't started to address yet is how do we actually get our students to tell us what they've done on the machine and what they've done themselves, as in what would be referencing. I've been around long enough to remember style guides that did not have URLs in them.
So do I.
These are the changes we've been through once already. We now have to do, I think, another iteration to include artificial intelligence or what other tools we're using. Any thoughts on that?
Well, when it comes to generative AI, it's quite difficult to find attribution because these systems are black boxes, right? We fed them the entire internet and then we sort of prompt an output with some keywords or a sentence, and then they give us a summary or a whole essay. And it usually doesn't come with references. They've been lost in the synthesizing of all the data. And I think this is where, we really have to take it to a whole new level through these design methods, because we're now dealing with something completely different. I mean, we know how to reference, documents, journal articles, and web pages. We don't know how to reference the output of a black box AI. But one way to think about it is to say, well, what AI black box was used, right? Because you can then find out what data was used, but sometimes not the whole internet was used, only a specific part. And also, what were the keywords that you used, and how many times did you do it, and did you merge any of those? Because you can sort of tell a lot of these systems, oh, generate me 20 answers, 50 answers, right? And then people just cherry pick. There's lots of different ways to use these systems for better outcomes. And I think this is what, we're all sort of saying. These are the kinds of skills that students now and, in the future need to have so that they can actually perform when they have jobs or, engage in society. And certainly academics need that as well. And this is very new. So if you're hearing about it for the first time, don't worry. You've got a decade, okay? It's fine. There's plenty of time here. And that's why we shouldn't rush. And that's why we should not have knee-jerk reactions to, ban stuff. We need to totally rethink things from, referencing all the way up to just what a summary means, and identify what are the things that AI can't really do, okay? If you read some of the, summaries and things, you go, wow, it's full of insights. It's not. It's just a summary of correlations that, the system has found, okay? And it tends to find the most common ones. So they resonate with us, and we think they're really great. But it's not doing what we are doing, okay? It doesn't find causality. And it's quite easy to trick these technologies. And there are a couple of other things that AI is not very good at. And Sarah sort of touched on one earlier about the building. If you plug in your keywords or your sentence to a generative AI, you get an outcome, you don't like it, or it doesn't really quite work, it's hard to then build on it. If you want to do, it's hard to get the AI to build on it. People can, but you can't say, oh, look, I like this part and I like that part, so do it again, but keep those two bits. You can't do that with AI. You've got to regenerate the whole thing from scratch. So humans are actually very good at this. And back to the question of, catching it, in research and in teaching. What is research? You know, we're building on the shoulders of giants. That's actually one of the most important skills that we have as humans. And we don't want to reinvent the wheel every time, which is why we need to learn to copy and know what to copy and when to copy, and then what to steal. And this is the art of kind of making it yours with your own insights and your unique way of bringing things together, your unique perspective of the world. And so I feel like I've probably answered that question.
Yeah. And we're down to the last 5 minutes, and we've got 4 questions emerging.
Okay.
That's great.
Kath Ellis of Chief Priest and Cupboard fame. And I think I'm going to ask the same question Kane asked, but in a slightly different way. So I'm acknowledging my sources at this point. Didn't want to be seen to be copying.
Kane is an AI as well.
Yeah, actually.
Yesterday we were asked a question about whether TEQSA and the Integrity Unit should ban Quillbot. And Helen gave a great answer. But back to your affordances, Phill. If we think about 2 of your affordances, which is outsourcing work to another person and cognitive offloading to a tool, what's the difference if somebody asks somebody on CHEG to answer a question in a chemistry exam and then asks an AI tool to answer a question in a chemistry exam? Is there any difference?
Oh, that's a great question. So I guess firstly, who knows what CHEG's doing behind the scenes? Who knows? Like, I doubt all of the stuff that's supposedly done by people is done by people. I think some of it's done by algorithms behind the scene, not like AI, just some pretty simple things. There is this thing, like, we know that some stuff that's supposedly done by people is done by AI, and there's some stuff that's supposedly done by AI is actually done by very poorly paid people who are doing it tough. But as to, like, is it different if the student outsources the work to a tool or a person? Is that a moral question that we're talking about here? Are we talking about student capabilities for when they graduate? Because, hey, I mean, I'd love to be better at delegating stuff to people. I'm pretty good at delegating stuff to tools. It's a validity question. Okay, so if we go the validity angle, then, like, I really think this idea of, you know, learning outcomes and incorporating tools and technology into our learning outcomes really matters then. At the moment, we say, you can do these things. When someone graduates, we sign on the dotted line and say they can do stuff. We don't say what tools they can use. We don't say if it's by themselves or with the assistance of other people, all of that. I think we need to start qualifying what we say people can do. And I think I'd celebrate if a student can graduate being able to do it on their own, do it with a tool, or do it with the help of someone else. And I'm sure there's some, like, Vygotskian scaffolding idea in there as well. Fascinating question.
It's a good question, but I remind you there is a little thing called the higher education standards.
It's totally okay with it.
So you've got to be careful that they actually done the work and understand it.
That is a learning expectation.
This
is a learning expectation. How do you access help? How do you find out? I mean, it's literally, it's a classic learning outcome. Able to access resources to be able to answer questions. It is a necessary skill. How else do you find the stuff to copy?
To take you up on the higher education standards framework thing, I think at the moment, and I can say this, I'm a researcher, I'm the academic sitting here without responsibility for this. I think at the moment, lots of institutions totally accredit people for stuff that they really can't do all by themselves. But we say that they can. Yeah. That's the higher education standards framework.
I'll let you make that comment.
You're all in trouble.
Next question.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve, for encouraging questions. I'm Jay. I'm also from University of Melbourne, and I built curriculum data there. So when I heard about encouraging copying, stealing, sorry, I'm just using those words, copying these words, actually, I'm actually feeling quite nervous about it, because reflecting my own education back in China, when I grew up there, we were actually encouraged by our teachers systematically to copy and memorizing, you know, and also to use these knowledge we have copied to do all the drills. The learning outcomes were shocking. Years later, I did my study in education at University of Wollongong. So, Sarah, nice to meet you. We were encouraged to analyze, to apply knowledge, to translate. And then suddenly I found, oh, actually, you know, I can think deeply, and I find a new door that's opened up to me to explore in the knowledge world. As a mom as well, and you know, for my children, my expectation for them, I know this kind of AI trend, this kind of digitalization trend, it is unstoppable. But I still believe as human beings, for our students as well in future, we still encourage them to take control of the knowledge, you know, the pathway to explore knowledge, not just to copy, not just to, if we just take and use, I don't think that's good enough. Thank you.
So I won't get you to answer that because I know from the time we've run out of it.
Yeah.
And
I think,
thank you very much.
There
Yeah.
is one really important thing
No,
to say, and I've been dying to say. I think it's really important that we also think about the fact that, well, yes, some students are accessing these tools, many, many are not. I think that it's really important to acknowledge the range of capabilities that we have among our students and not to assume that they're using these things or able to use them. And that's really important, that there is, just like in this room, a highly variable field of capabilities and knowledge and understanding and work practices. And so that's, again, I mean, that's something that they're not all using AI. In fact, it's a small subset. So, but it's coming. So I think, like Mary said,
But I think if I could just say one thing on that.
Sorry.
You know, I mean, the student body is very broad and diverse as well, and so different sectors or different groups of students will benefit in different ways. You know, there are visual thinkers, there are dyslexic students. Like, there's a whole range of people who could really benefit from, you know, playing with and seeing what, you know, seeing examples, even poor examples, and then sort of being, you know, trying to critique, trying to see why that one's better than that one. And I feel like there's a lot of opportunity to help disadvantaged students with these
Excellent
technologies.
point.
Yeah.
Now,
Cool.
I need to cut you guys off.
No, we're
because
done.
You've
Just
been
have
too
to get
good
it in there.
and too many questions still outstanding. So please thank our three speakers.
Thank you. Nice